Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Data into Action, or Translating Your Web Statistics into To-Dos. I'm Jamie Machik with the Nicolay Federated Library System in Green Bay. Happy to have all of you here. Our presenter today is Nina McHale, and Nina is the Library Director at the Red Rocks Community College in Colorado. She's actually a Wisconsin native, and maybe she will mention that when she begins. And we will be stopping and taking questions as she goes. We are also recording this presentation, and we'll have the slides on our website available later today. You also saw in the slide presentation that you will also get a short 2-question survey. When you get that follow-up email, we do appreciate your feedback, so if you could fill that out, that would be wonderful. So, Nina, whenever you are ready.
All right, thank you so much, Jamie. I'll just go ahead and dive right in here. As Jamie mentioned, I live in Colorado now. Red Rocks Community College is in Lakewood. We're sort of tucked up in the foothills, kind of west of Denver. Lakewood's a Denver suburb. I grew up in La Crosse, the west end of the state, and I graduated from UW-Madison longer ago than I care to think about. My parents retired out here too, and we joke that they found the right house to live in because it had a Packers-themed basement. So they bought the house that they retired from Wisconsin to Colorado in from some people who are also former cheeseheads. So anyway, as Jamie mentioned, also I'm the library director here at Red Rocks Community College. Like a lot of you, I did some homework and checked you out and checked out your websites. Like many of you, we're a very small library. I'm a director with a staff of 3 librarians. So I sort of feel your pain in terms of staffing and technology and what the reality of that is like. I do want this to be very applicable as we go along, so if I'm going too fast or if I'm going too slow, please do let Jamie know, and if you have questions as we go along, because I do want this to be very practical. I do want you to come away from this feeling like you've got some things, like you really do have some to-dos to take away from web statistics, some things that you can do immediately, some things that you can plan on doing in the future with your website based on web statistics after this presentation. Before I was an administrator here, I started out in reference at a community college out in Maryland, Howard Community College, before we moved out here to Colorado. And then I was in web development and IT for about a decade before coming to Red Rocks. Most of my experience is academic, but I do have a couple years in public libraries at Arapahoe District. Arapahoe County is that's one of the big suburban districts in Denver. So while that's a bigger public library district, like I said, I do have experience in a very small library, so I'm hoping I can apply that in a way that will help those of you who are in smaller public libraries today. Alrighty, so let's get started here. Our agenda, things I would like to cover in the next hour. I want to talk about some assumptions that I made. Again, I did some homework and got the attendee list from Jamie, so I know a little bit about who you are, what your websites are like, what software, what web analytics software you're using. We'll talk about some of the limitations of web analytics software, what it tells us, what it can't tell us, and why. We'll talk, this will be sort of the meat of the presentation, web metrics and what they mean and what they can tell us, and what questions we can ask, what questions we should ask based on the data that we collect using those software packages. And then I hope to have time, about 15 minutes, and Jamie, if you can kind of help me watch the clock as we get towards 1:45, got to watch my time zone change here, I want to make sure that I do leave time for questions. And I do have my email address on the last slide, and everyone please feel free to follow up if there's something, if you have a specific question about something about your own setup, something about your own situation that I didn't cover or we didn't get to. Or if you have a follow-up question for me, something that occurs to you later this afternoon or as you're driving home this evening. Okay, so let's talk about those assumptions. So I started out, when I was finishing up my slides last week, I thought, well, I bet most of these people are using Google Analytics. And then I realized, well, I can be sneaky and check. So if you look at the, if you view the code of web pages, Google Analytics has a very unique signature. If you look for a capital U, a capital A, and a dash, if you put the tracking code for Google Analytics in your website yourself, if you see that U, A dash, and then a string of, I believe it's 7 numbers, that's your tracking code for Google Analytics. So I checked your websites, and 15 out of 25, or 68% of you do, in fact, use Google Analytics. So that's what we're going to cover primarily today. 2 of you use a product called Piwik, which I'm less familiar with, but the good news is that Piwik will report a lot of similar things, and there is a common jargon. There is a common terminology for web analytics software. So if you are getting exit pages or referrals or whatever data you're pulling from one software package, it will mean pretty much the same thing. So even though we'll be focusing on Google Analytics, again, the terminology will be the same. The questions that you can ask yourself based on the data reporting from those metrics will be the same. For those of you who don't have anything installed right now, if you would like to chat with me about that, again, please feel to reach out afterwards. I'll have my email up on that last slide. If you don't have access to the dashboard, that's my second assumption you can see right there. If that is something that you need to chat about, how to get to that, or if you're not sure where that is or how to get to this information, please let me know. That's something maybe I can help you figure out. And the third assumption, and I assume that that's why you signed up for this, you wanted to learn a little bit more about what web analytics are capable of and what you can do with them, and also that you want to do something meaningful with all of this. We have this wealth of information, and literally these numbers are ticking away by the second, by the minute. We have all of this great data that we're gathering about our websites. Let's do something fun with it. Let's do something meaningful with it. And also, we gather and report all this data about our physical libraries. We report gate counts, we report circulation, we report how many books we catalog every year. We tell those stories to our stakeholders, to our boards. We should also be reporting information about website use as well. Oh, and I do have, I didn't mention this on the agenda, but I do have one thing I included at the end because I thought it would be kind of fun, because I'm tasking my staff to do this, and I figured I better walk the walk as well. I created a little web metrics infographic using a program called PictoChart. And I tasked my staff to create an infographic based on statistics in their areas. And one of my areas is the library website, so I had to do that for Works, and it dovetailed with this presentation nicely, so I stuck it in there too. And it's something that you could do as sort of a fun takeaway to practice with some of the things that you've maybe learned from this presentation, or some of the things that you're maybe already reporting to your stakeholders, to your colleagues, or to your board, to your bosses, etc. Alrighty. Okay, so let's talk about, we talked about assumptions, let's talk about some limitations. Jamie, it's a little early, but do we have any questions yet?
I'm not seeing anything, but if anyone does have any, feel free to send those my way, and we will get to those. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Alrighty. So I want to talk a little bit, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the limitations of web analytics, how they report, what they report, and like with any statistics gathering methods, no statistics are perfect. So for example, we do not have gates in our library right now. They were very old. Cell phones would set them off, so we just got rid of them. So we do head counts in our library right now. I have my student employees. They have a piece of paper. Once an hour on the hour, they walk around the library and they do a head count. It's not perfect, but gate counts aren't perfect either because I wish I could go back in time and talk to the architect who did this. We have 2 doors. We have 2 entrances. So it's kind of hard to get an accurate gate count in terms of what is use of the physical library anyway. So we sort of accept that that is kind of a flawed way of measuring physical use of the library, but it's kind of the best we've got. And it's sort of that way with web analytics as well. And let's talk about why. And in some ways that's a good way. As libraries, we are committed in terms of books and checkouts. We are committed to protecting patron privacy. And web analytics do that after a fashion as well. Analytics software uses IP addresses, and also Google Analytics uses they call it a client ID. They use numbers. So if I were to, on my laptop right now, if I were to go to our library's website and start clicking around using the website, it's not recording me as Nina McHale. There's no privately identifiable information. It's collecting about me at all. And that IP address is totally made up. I have no idea where that 154.34252, I just made that up. I have no idea where that network is. So they record user behavior in a way that is anonymous, which is a good thing, but it also has limitations. So if I, Nina McHale, do something on the library's website on my laptop right here at my desk in my office, and then I, Nina McHale, walk out to one of our public computers in the library, it's going to be a different IP address, it's going to be a different client ID in Google Analytics, and I will be recorded as a different person. Similarly, if you're a library, if you think about this, if you have public computing, one computer is going to be one IP, and you might have 10 people using that computer on the same day. If you are a large library, a lot of times IT departments will dynamically assign IPs, so the IP on a computer will be different every day. So even if you have a regular patron who comes in, does the same thing, clicks through your website in exactly the same way, does the same behavior every day on the same computer, that might be logged as a different user every day because that IP may change. However, as I mentioned, this actually sort of protects user privacy because, again, it's not collecting any PII, any personally identifying information. One other limitation, because web analytics software, I'm sort of skipping ahead to my third point here, it's designed for e-commerce, and success in e-commerce is defined always by the sale, defined by making money. We're not out to make money. We're not out to make a sale. We're not out to make money. And in e-commerce, you want your site to be sticky. You want people to stay in your site. You don't want people to exit your site. If you're REI, you want people to stay on your site until they purchase something from you. You don't want them to click and go out to Dick's Sporting Goods or something else. If they're on our site and they leave our site to go to Overdrive, and they're on our website and they click out to the catalog, which will be a different domain, so technically a different website even though it's the same web presence. Or if they're in an academic library and they click out to go to JSTOR or LexisNexis, that's not always a bad thing. E-commerce tends to be sort of greedy and selfish. You want to keep people on your site, whereas libraries, we like to refer people to other places, to other trusted places like Overdrive or electronic databases or the catalog. And that kind of touches on what the second point on the screen there is that our web presence is made very much of silos, if you've ever heard that term. We have a website, we have a catalog, we might have LibGuides, we might have Evanced to help with calendars and scheduling events, we might have Overdrive. And you can assign analytics tracking code to all of these individual tools, but then tracking how library users use these tools as one web presence can be difficult to set up. So that is one limitation specifically to how web analytics would work across all of these different tools that, again, we tend to think of as one web presence, but they are these individual silos since they are technically different domains. For example, I have library.rrcc.edu as our website, but our catalog is hosted somewhere else, so it has a slightly different URL. Okay, so anyway, moving on. Again, but like with the head count example that I gave, where we have no gates, we have no technology that counts door counts, so we just have the students kind of make ticky marks. It's better than nothing as long as you understand the limitations of the way that you're gathering statistics. If you think of it as sort of like reading tea leaves and following trends, it's definitely better than nothing. And if you get used to the patterns that you see and understand what those patterns are and track them over time, it still gives you something to go on. It still gives you a story to tell. It still gives you data to track and report to all of your stakeholders. All right. Okay. So let's dive into Google Analytics at this point. I want to focus mostly on, so this is the Google Analytics dashboard. And just as a word of caution, you might already know this, Google Analytics, like any Google product, as you know, they are big innovators. They change all the time. So something that I show you as a screenshot today might look different even next week. So just be prepared for that. We're going to focus on the metrics, on specific metrics, and we don't even really have time to go through everything under each of these categories. I want to look specifically at audience, acquisition, and behavior today. And again, we won't look at all of the features under all of these. We're going to look at ones that I think can, if you're just sort of getting started in this, give you really sort of big bang for your buck, where you can start looking to gather data, make some big impacts, have some good discussions, share some good information with your stakeholders. This, I wanted to mention though, real time. It's not that real time isn't really cool. It is. This is a screenshot that I took the other day. Our semester ended last Tuesday, so don't be sad that there was nobody on our website. That's okay. Everybody left last Tuesday, and our students are gone until June 1st. So real time shows people who are on your website literally, as it says, right now. So when I happened to grab this screen capture, there was literally no active users on the website. But that's okay. Like I said, it was after the end of the semester. So if you're curious about what is happening on your website right now, real time, you can have a look. You can see where people are, what pages they're looking at, how many page views they're seeing, what it was like, and you can see there were 2 people on the website 21 minutes before this screen capture was taken. So that it wasn't, we weren't completely alone. Conversions is the other one there that's listed. That's more of an advanced web topic. Conversion is, if you think again, sort of the e-commerce model, a conversion is, in terms of e-commerce, a success. It's something has happened. And Google Analytics has changed it so a conversion doesn't necessarily always mean an e-commerce sale, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to be talking about today. If that's something that you're interested in, again, you can definitely follow up with me afterwards, but again, I want to focus on audience acquisition and behavior today. Alrighty. And also, too, I'm aware that some of you, I know a lot of you use, about 8 of you use Drupal, 6 of you use WordPress, and I know that some of you might use a Google Analytics dashboard within the software itself. Maybe that's something that your web developer set up for you, so you might not see this actual dashboard. But again, if you're looking at the metrics within the software itself, the terminology used is going to be the same too. So even if you're not looking at the actual Google Analytics dashboard, again, the terminology used is going to be the same. Alrighty, so let's start with, again, we're going to look at audience acquisition and behavior, so let's jump into audience here. So this is the demographics page for audience. And I want to focus on, I'm going to skip ahead a slide here and just to give you sort of a taste of the metrics we're going to focus on. So audience, we're going to talk about who is using our web page. And the metrics that we're looking at specifically here under audience are users, and they've changed this. I was actually a little bit surprised. They used to call it visitors. Google Analytics used to call the people who come to your website visitors as opposed to users. And they break that down as new versus returning. And simply this just means people who have been here before as opposed to people who have not. And again, remember, this is not tracking Nina the person, has she been here before? This is an IP address that is recognized by your web server versus an IP address that is not. So keeping in mind, again, those limitations of how this software actually works. Demographics is something that's still very new and exciting, I think. I think this has a lot of implications for us as libraries and potentially even for collection development, especially in terms of interests. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So we can see information about age, gender, and interests of people who are visiting the library. And if you think about this is sort of in parallel, we know our regular users in the physical world. We know, we can sort of approximate. We know the age, the gender, the interests of our heavy users in the library. This gives us a sneak peek at sort of the invisible people that we don't see. So I'm really excited about age, gender, and interest that this is something that they've included. This is still something pretty new for web analytics. We can learn a lot about location. I would imagine for a lot of public libraries, this is of interest to you too. It can be broken down as granular as city. Language, when a user sets a language preference in a browser. For example, when I worked at Arapahoe Library District, we had a very large there was a very large Russian-speaking community and also a very large Spanish-speaking community. So it was important for us to track that information as well. We can learn a lot about the technology they use. We can see what operating system they use, what % of our users prefer Macs versus PCs. And you'll even see like an Xbox or a PlayStation. Sometimes people even use gaming consoles to access websites. You can see what web browsers people prefer. Chrome is generally the top one nowadays. You can see what network people use. For example, we're a college campus, so a lot of our traffic comes from the campus network. You can see your network providers. Comcast and Quest are the big ones here in the Denver area. So when you look under network, you'll see your local internet providers listed there likely, as well as your in-library networks as well. You'll see a lot of information about mobile. What % of your users overall are mobile? Do you have a mobile or a responsive website? And which devices do they prefer? Typically, you'll probably see that it's still Apple-dominated, iPhone, iPad, but I think that's changing a little bit too. Okay, so I want to go back a slide here to the Google Analytics dashboard quick and talk about a couple of metrics, a couple of terms that I don't have on that list before we move on. And I also want to mention, I mentioned one thing that you should become familiar with is the patterns of use. So if you look, I set, and you can, it's sort of cut off on the upper right here, but you can always set the time period of the statistics that you're looking at. So since we're an academic library, and for a public library, you probably want to set it as for a fiscal year. But these are just sort of examples of how, based on your usage, you would want to look at statistics differently. So for an academic library, I set this for August 2016 through May 2017, since our academic year just ended. And you can see the sort of rises and falls as you would expect to see. October and February are typically our busiest months. You can see end of November, you can see a dip for Thanksgiving break. End of March, you can see a dip for spring break. January, you can see a lull for the holiday intercession. And if I were to break this down weekly, you would see Monday through Thursday are very busy. We typically, as a commuter campus, we typically don't have a lot of classes on Fridays, so there's generally nobody here on Fridays. Public libraries, you might see the opposite. You might see more of an upswing on Saturdays and Sundays as people come in and use the library website to look things up. I wish I still had access to Arapahoe's Google Analytics account. I could have gone in and gotten some examples for public libraries there. But again, keep in mind how people use your website, when, and how those use patterns, get familiar with those use patterns, essentially. And then so if you look down under those blue jaggy lines, you'll see the pie chart there is returning visitor versus new visitor. So we are about 57% returning visitor versus 42% new visitor. and you'll see 4 other metrics displayed there. So sessions, just to give you an idea of what sessions are. A session is one period of activity. So you'll have a user participating in one session on your website. And Google Analytics defaults to 30 minutes for a session. So we had, if you do the math on that, 18,272 sessions. So multiply that times 30 minutes. You can see sort of what typical academic use of our library website is. We had 8,000 users and then 30,000 page views. So that's how many pages on the website were looked at. And typically people looked at 1.69 pages per session while they were here. And if you think about how people use an academic library website, that might not seem like very much, but typically what they do, and I'm going to show you another really cool feature, it's called user flow in Google Analytics. It's how people move through the website when they are on it. Typically what they do, they're told to do research by their professors, and this will vary for a public library too. Typically they're told to do research by their professors. They come to the library's homepage, they go to the databases page, they find the database they want, and then they are referred off of our library webpage to JSTOR, to LexisNexis, to EBSCO. And that's okay. We don't keep them on our site very long, but we've referred them to a trusted source. And with a public library, it might be the same thing. You refer them to the catalog. You refer them to Overdrive. You refer them to Tumblebooks. You refer them to some trusted source that they've come there to find. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Really quick, let's think about some questions we can ask ourselves based on this information. So if we're looking at all of these numbers about the who, about the audience, about the people who come to our website, what can we ask ourselves? What should we ask ourselves? And then what do we do with this information? And unfortunately, it's going to vary so much that I can't tell each and every one of you what to do with that information. It's kind of incumbent upon you to come up with the to-do list. And again, reach out to me if you've gone through these questions and you're like, okay, so Nina, what do I do with this? We noticed this, this, and this. If you're having a hard time coming up with the to-dos after you ask yourself these questions, don't beat your head against the wall. Don't be a stranger. Reach out to me. But I think you'll see some patterns. I think you'll notice some things after you ask yourselves these questions about these web statistics. So first of all, how does your web traffic compare to your foot traffic? How do you feel about that? One example I can give you here, and one thing you may notice is one thing you might think of, especially if you're a director, skipping down to that third subpoint there. Are there any staffing impacts or changes or reallocations that you could make once you start looking at these numbers? When I first arrived in Colorado, I worked at University of Colorado, Denver, and we noticed that our web traffic and our foot traffic were almost identical. We had 80 people who worked in that library. One person worked on the website. The other 79 worked on the physical library. That gave us enough leverage in the IT department to think about making some changes to, hey, maybe we need some more staff to be working on, at least content for the website, that kind of thing. So I put, how do we feel about that? How do we feel about our web traffic comparing to our foot traffic? Do we want to promote online more? Why or why not? And it might be realistic that you don't want to promote online more because do you have the staffing to support that? And if that's your reality, and sometimes you have to be okay with that. And as I've mentioned before, get used to what the hourly, the daily, the weekly, monthly use patterns are like. Are there similarities or differences if you've got more than one physical location? Is your smallest branch, is the foot traffic similar to the daily use traffic for that branch? Does that tell you anything? Do you have an evening spike? Are people coming to after dinner? Are people coming to the library's website to get to check out ebooks or for entertainment or to download AV materials, that kind of thing? With the rise of mobile, that was one thing that people noticed, is there was sort of a commuter spike. Or an after-dinner spike in just sort of web use generally, not just with libraries. I showed that pie chart of our new and returning users, and that showed that our returning users were about 42% and our new users were 57%. So make sure you're equally welcoming. Make sure you're not assuming that everyone coming to the library's website knows how to use the library. Make sure that your website presents information and tools in such a way that a novice user could use it just as well as your diehard users who are in the door every day, who know how to use the catalog, who know how to use all the functions of the catalog. Make sure someone who's coming to you for the first time wouldn't be put off by the way your catalog appears or the way your library website appears. Looking at that demographic information, do the numbers about age and gender and interest, do those align with what you know about your in-person users? And my example here is I started thinking about this. So based on what you know, if you know that your online users are men 25 to 34 with interest in sports, would that change how you market things? And I'm talking about both things in the library and on the library website. And this is kind of a generalization, but let's say you notice your weekday users tend to be moms or women caregivers who are coming in with kids for story time. Maybe you want to market online things to them more. Maybe you're noticing that, or maybe you already know that you're having a hard time, and this is, pardon me again to this, I've been out of public libraries for a while, but maybe you know that you're not getting the 30-somethings and 40-somethings that aren't parents in. If the web data is sort of bearing that out, if you're looking at your demographic information about age, maybe if they're the ones that are online, how does that change how you market things? So talking about location, if you're looking at, and I'll show you the infographic at the end, there's a map in Google Analytics that everybody just loves. It's a map of the world that shows where people are coming from. If are your users coming from where you'd expect? So if you're a big rural district, or if you're a district that covers 3 cities, does the data show something interesting? Does it paint a useful picture of where your users are coming from? This was something that we really looked at Arapahoe Library District because it was a huge county that was a giant suburban area, but then we also had these 2 little rural communities, so it was interesting to see how that use was spread out and how that impacted maybe even things like funding or staffing for those areas, how much use was coming online from those small rural areas. And again, even though it's online usage, it often can have an impact on the real world with things like staffing, with things like funding. Ask yourself if you're supporting technology in the way that you should. If you don't have a mobile-friendly or a responsive website, at least check and make sure that the site looks good on, if you look and see that iPads and iPhones are your most popular mobile devices, make sure the site looks good on them. Check your screen resolutions. You can go through and get a list of the most popular screen resolutions. Does your site look good at 1366 by 768 or whatever the most popular screen resolution? And again, are there impacts for staffing? Do you need to hire a web person? Do you need to get your web person help? Do you have enough people staffing the web? And the answer in libraries is almost always no. And also, too, we talk about real-world impacts. Are you letting them use a web browser they like while they're in the library? I've worked at a lot of places where it's a Microsoft network and IE is the browser that's imposed on everybody. Chrome is by far the most popular browser if you look at the web statistics for most library websites. Chrome is the one that gets to use most on both Mac and PC. And then finally, the metric here is, or the tool here, it's not a metric properly, I don't think, is users flow. This is, I'll show you this on the next slide. And this shows you how users move through your site when they're on it. And one thing to ask yourself is, does that match your expectations? Why or why not? And I would really strongly caution against forcing users to match our expectations as librarians, and sort of go with the flow and go with what users want and try and match the library tools to what they want. And I mentioned, so for an academic library, this is very cool. This is the flow report. I'll get back to the academic library thought in a sec here. If you look at, I know the print here is very small. I apologize for that. If you look, there's sort of 3 stacks of information here. There's sort of that white stack on the left that shows the breakdown by country. So most of our traffic is the United States, understandably. And then the sort of middle stack where there's that big green block at the top, that shows where people start off on our library webpage. So mostly they start off at the home page. And then the next stack over on the right shows their first interaction. So typically what they do, and this is what we'd expect, that first big green block in the middle that shows 14,000 of them typically go to, and then that little sort of narrower green rectangle on the right is search. So typically they start off at the library's homepage, they go to search, which is our A to Z listing of databases, and then they click on, EBSCO, JSTOR, LexisNexis, and they're kind of gone after that. So that shows a pretty typical use of the academic library's webpage. And again, for a public library's webpage, I would anticipate the same thing. You would have sort of that big green block in the middle. Your starting page is going to be your home page. Then probably they're going to look at an hours page, or maybe they'll click off to Overdrive, or maybe they'll click off to the catalog. It depends on what your most popular content is going to be. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a sec here, Jamie, and ask you if there are any questions, because that was a lot of information.
You are giving a lot, but it's great information, and I have a feeling people are probably going to go back and watch the recording if they're not getting everything. I'm not seeing anything come in, but I guess I want to ask the group, and please submit this in the question area, so maybe we can share some dialogue at the end. I'd like to know how many of you are currently working on better website management. Are you working on a new website for your library? And if you're not, if you're working on this, what challenges are you having? So feel free to type some of that information in the question box, and we can relate that at the end. Carolyn asks, I am curious about how the demographic information is collected. The age, gender, and interest. I would have to follow up on that because, like I said, it is very new. But Carolyn, I'd be happy to follow up and get back to you on that. Okay, so Nina's contact info slide will be at the end of the presentation, so you can we can make sure you have that. Thanks. That's all we have right now.
Okay, great. And the good news is that audience is by far, that was the densest. And just looking at the time too, keeping me on the time, acquisition is going to be quick, and behavior is going to be quick. And then questions too. So moving on, so let's talk about acquisition. So acquisition, simply, and I'll skip ahead a slide here, acquisition is how. And by how I mean, how do people get to our website? And there are 4 ways. So again, this is pretty cut and dry compared to the who, the audience. People are referred to our site. That means they clicked on a link to our website from another website. So for a public library, maybe they go to the city's webpage or a parent institution. Maybe they're on your catalog and they click on a home link that takes them back to the actual library webpage out of the catalog. Maybe they're in Overdrive and they click back on, they want to check your hours, so they click on a link to library hours, and that takes them out of Overdrive back onto the library page. So that would be referral. Direct is just typing the URL into a web browser. So they would type yourlibrary.org or a sub URL or a sub URL like yourlibrary.org/hours. So they're just typing that into the browser on the address bar. Organic search would be, hey, I wonder what the public library's website is. So they would type a phrase like Appleton Public Library into the browser bar. And then this one is a new one that Google Analytics has added pretty recently. It's social. So it'd be linking from social media to your library's website. So it's tracking activity, linking from Twitter, Facebook, if you have a social media presence, back to your library's website. So let's look at what the acquisition dashboard page looks like. This is Red Rocks. Not surprisingly, since I do almost no social media right now, that's something I'm looking to fix. You can see no yellow in that little pie chart there. Most of it is referral, and not surprisingly, again, if you think of the way students navigate in an academic setting, a lot of it is referral from the college's website. Direct, again, would be typing library.rrcc.edu, and then organic search would be typing a phrase like Red Rocks Community College Library into the browser. All right, so I'll move kind of quickly through this because I think, compared to audience, I think it's pretty straightforward. So things to ask about acquisition. So how do people get to our site? What does your pie chart look like? What are the percentages? Where do they link from? Is there, maybe if the local media has done a spot on you, there might be a link from a newspaper website. They might be referring from that. Are they linking from your other tools? Are there any surprises in there? If you have LibGuides, is there a link from LibGuides? If you have eVanced. One of our referrals is we have proxy server set up. So there are a lot of links from the proxy server that we use to get off-campus access to databases. So that shows up a lot too. Direct. So one thing you can tell by direct, so for example, we used to use the URL rrcc.edu/library, which is kind of old and outdated. I would prefer, for marketing reasons, that our students and faculty use library.rrcc.edu. So if you've sort of rebranded your website, or if you've rebranded the whole library, maybe the URL was part of that, you can see, if you click through, if people are, you can literally see what URLs people are using. If you go under direct, you can see all of the different URLs people have typed in. With, if you have a tricky name, which in Wisconsin, I know the place names there, you can see every spelling error people have ever made as part of your either organic search or direct. You can see every URL, every search term people have used to get to that have landed people on your website. One other good example of this for organic search, you can think of, or you can look at what people call your library, how they get there. Maybe you have a unique historical collection. For example, I worked at Georgetown University, and we had a very unique special collections department. So a lot of times in our organic search terms, for example, we had Graham Greene, the author, we had his papers. So a lot of times people would be searching for Graham Greene, and they would end up on our website because we had Graham Greene's papers. So if you have any sort of unique historical collections, any local history items, that kind of thing, that might show up in your, if you know people come to you for that, that might show up in your search terms as well under organic search. For social, if you might be wondering, so we're putting this time into having a Facebook page. Is it driving traffic to our site? You can find that out looking at your acquisitions data. Okay. Any questions about acquisition at this point? Like I said, this is kind of short and sweet compared to compared to audience.
Not any questions, but a few comments came in. I asked about anyone currently working on a website and challenges. Anne said management website, and she said, I'm learning analytics as I go and web design as I go too. I've been working on a new website for a year. Leanne said, yes, we are. This is new to me and a little bit of a challenge right now. So Nina, you can probably empathize with some of those comments.
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Yes, that was my career before I got here, was the whole learning as I go. And Anne and Leanne, I'd be happy to provide you with some more resources on those kinds of things too. If you'd like to reach out and let me know what platform you're using, if you're WordPress or Drupal, please let me know. You can send me an email, let me know what kind of challenges you're having. I'd be happy to point you to some more resources too as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we're at 12:45, so there are only two things I want to point out under behavior here, and then we'll have probably 10 minutes for questions here. So behavior, you're asking, the behavior metrics ask what? What are people doing when they're on your site? And this is the one, people get excited about this because librarians want to know what pages on the site are people looking at. And what the site content report does is it takes all of the pages on the site ranked in the order of most to least popular and in terms of how many times the page was visited. So you'll see, it'll show you, you wonder, I put all this time into revising this site about X. Does anybody ever read it? And you can see exactly how many times over a certain period of time, if you define it as a month or an academic year, how many times do people look at that? The other thing of interest under behavior is exit pages. So this is where exit page is where someone clicks on a link to leave the site. So the most popular exit page for our website and for pretty much any academic library website is, again, that databases list page. So an exit page is where they click on a link to go to, and again, for a library web page, that's not always a bad thing. They're probably exiting the library's web page to go to Tumblebooks or Overdrive or Events to register for an event or something like that. So another site could be something that we want to go to, whereas exit pages for e-commerce might look like, an exit page report for e-commerce might look like, ooh, these are the competitors that we're losing them to. So it's not necessarily a bad thing for us. Okay, so this, for example, just clicking back here, so these are my top pages for Red Rocks. The home page is almost always going to be, you can see there are 17,000 page views for our homepage. That's where people land when they come to the library's website, and that's going to be the case for a public library too. The number two page on the website is search. That's our databases A to Z list. Number 3 is looking for books. That's a tutorial for how to use the catalog. Then hours. That's always going to be a popular one for public libraries too. Then citing sources, contact, which is our directory, how to find the librarians, and you can see kind of down from there, contact, how to use ebooks at, I don't know why it's RCC and not RRCC, but better fix that. That's the other great thing too, is when you start looking at your analytics, you find errors that you've made, for example, in the URL of number 7 here. The number 8 on this list, faculty, is a information about faculty page. So you can see there's a pretty steep drop off too. It's 17,000 page views for the home page, only 8,000 by comparison for the search, and then it drops off pretty steeply after that. And this is, you may have heard this term before, this is what's called the long tail effect, where you have a couple of pages that get hit really hard, and then you can see when you get down in the 8, 9, 10 area, those pages, and remember I took all of these screenshots with the academic year. This academic year is sort of the defining time period. So in the whole academic year, these pages have been looked at about 200 times. So that really helps me to determine, what pages do I really need to spend time on? How do I need to develop my content? Where do I really need to focus my effort? So it looks like the home page is obviously really important. That search page is important. I should probably make sure that looking for books tutorial is still up to date. So again, it has, even though we're looking at online data, it's going to have an effect on real world, how I spend my time, how I task my staff to spend their real time, how I task my staff to spend their time as well. Okay, so really quick, 1 minute, questions to ask about behavior, about that site content and those exit pages. And I think I've probably made these points already. So are our top hit pages, when we look at that list of top content, is it what we expected? Are we spending time developing content where we should and on what we should? Is that search page for me, that number 2 page, are there any errors on it? Is it up to date? Is it actually useful? And as I mentioned before, don't try to force people to go on your web page where they don't want to go. If you know that your hours page is your number 2 page, again, just make sure that it's error-free, up to date. And maybe if you want to promote something, maybe on your hours page, put a sneaky little, hey, did you know we have this great resource? Or, hey, did you know it's time to sign up for summer reading? If you see that, your number 3 page is something that you didn't expect, maybe sneak in a little something that you want them to see on that page. So as far as exit pages, do we like where people are we going when we leave their site? Again, librarians, we're all about referring people to things. We're not greedy like e-commerce. We don't want them to stay on our site necessarily. Make sure we're sending them good places like Overdrive, electronic resources, tools that we license, tools that we pay for, or other websites just that we recommend. And that, depends on you and what your mission is and what people are coming to you seeking for information. And finally, again, getting back to that question, are we tasking web work appropriately? Do we have enough staff? And again, I know the answer is almost always no. Do we have enough staff to support the site? Do we have enough staff contribute content to the site? And are we doing enough with social media? Think back about that social metric. Is social media driving people to the website? Are we developing content that users find engaging? And you can tell that by, I spent 4 hours developing this website, and in the past month, only 5 people looked at it. How do you change that? How do you, with these numbers, you at least are armed with that information, and you know what web pages people are looking at, what's getting in front of people, that kind of thing, and you can think about sort of strategically how to change that. Okay, I'll just show the infographic really quick. I threw this in as just sort of an example of, there's a lot of jargon, obviously. We've spent the past 45 minutes talking about that. So one thing we're talking about here, and I know that's a challenge with public libraries as well, communicating to your board, communicating to your colleagues, your bosses, just telling our stories generally about libraries and what we do. And with the website, you've got sort of this extra layer of web jargon that we're sort of learning and getting used to. So I just kind of created this last night. It's not, the best infographic ever. My colors don't kind of match. And I have that in that most popular content graph in the middle. I've got my one axis is untitled as yet. But I just took some information. That map is at the top. That's my location map straight out of Google Analytics. Just a quick infographic about how the library website gets used. So this is an example of, I used PictoChart, which is free, pictochart.com. And I just kind of put this together as a quick and dirty, this is something I could show my boss. How does the website get used? And this is something you could, combine this with world web statistics. You could combine this with gate counts or, number of books cataloged, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to throw that in as an example of how you could communicate this to any of your stakeholders. Okay, I'll skip over that and we'll go straight to questions at this point. And I don't need to go anywhere right at 1 either, so if anybody wanted to hang out. And again, I know that was a lot. So if you're, in an hour, if you're sitting at your desk or if you're driving home later and you think, hey, what did she mean by that? Or what if we did this?
Shirley has a question. What was the URL for the graphic?
Oh, for the tool, for this, for the info. Let's see. I will post that. It's the tool is called PictoChart. You can see it at the bottom. PictoChart.com.
Okay. I'm going to type that in the chat box. There we go.
Yeah, and I'll post my slides and I'll post a link to that too.
Awesome. And actually, I will be posting your slides to our site as well.
Oh, perfect.
Those will be available. So I realized I asked the first question without unmuting myself, so that's why there was that silence, which is always fun. You said you were interested in boosting your social media presence into directing people to the site. How do you do this?
So for the person who asked the question, are you doing anything currently? Or are you just, or are you sort of interested in what we are going to do?
So Carolyn, if you could answer that. Let's table that question and move on to another one. We'll come back. This is a lot of data.
The short answer is we're just not doing anything.
We'll come back to that. Where did you start learning about Google Analytics, articles, videos, Appear, etc.?
I started learning about it. Oh, sorry, was someone saying something? Or was that, I think I just heard my voice echoing.
No, that was you.
I started, okay, let me go back to, so I had, let's see, I had a slide with more reading. So the sort of web analytics guru is Avinash Kaushik, his name is. And both of these books, they're a little dated. His first one is 10 years old now, but he's still seen widely as sort of the godfather of analytics. And I would still highly recommend it. It's sitting right next to my computer now. I used it to, I kind of looked at it to review for this. It's called Web Analytics in an Hour a Day. And then Web Analytics 2.0 was the follow-up to that in 2010. And then, so my colleague, Tabby Farney, she is the director of, I forget exactly what her title is. I have it on this slide. She's Director of Web Services and Emerging Technologies at University of Colorado Springs. She and I wrote a book for librarians about it, and that was published by ALA. It's called Web Analytics for Information Professionals. That was published in 2013. So it's sort of the Avinash Kaushik's books are a little more e-commerce focused, but that does not change the fact that, you know, he does a very good job of, you know, you go through in an hour a day, you get very familiar with the terms. So that's kind of where I started, and then just, you know, making a point of going in and just getting in a habit of, you know, once a month, report out how many visitors and sessions did you have. Just set up a little report. When I worked at Arapahoe, we got used to, I would submit to my boss, who was sort of the head of, she was head of web and cataloging. I would give to her a monthly report of, you know, we had so many visitors, we had so many, I can try and find the sample reports of these too. So just get in the habit of reporting out and using the software. And then, oh, there's the other thing I was going to mention too is this blog, Kaushik's blog. It's called, it used to be called Occam's Razor. I don't know if it still is, but the URL is there too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so Carolyn asked about the social media question. How do you boost your social media presence into directing people to the site? She said she's just interested in what you are doing.
Okay, right now, I'm embarrassed to say that I'm kind of doing nothing. But so,
You're honest.
Right, I'm honest, yeah. Look, if you remember that graph, it showed nothing. I looked at what the actual percentage is. It's 0.03%. And that was probably because our marketing department here at the college has a very active social media presence, and they probably like threw me a bone and they're like, hey, look at what the library has, and like made a post about the library for me. So basically, kind of the point of social media, as I've always understood it, is to serve as a funnel to get people to your website. Mm-hmm. So try and the key with social, I've been kind of understaffed, and I finally have a full staff of 3 professional librarians. Mm-hmm. The key with social media and with developing any web content, I think, is just to make sure you're doing it regularly. So come up with, you know, if you have an event going on, make it part of your marketing strategy to say, oh, wait, you know, we've got this author event. Make a Facebook post about it. So that's the hard thing. It's you know, in 5 minutes, anybody can have a Facebook page for the library.
Right.
The hard thing is maintaining that momentum.
And doing it well, I think.
Right, doing it well.
Doing it well.
Exactly.
I think there's an assumption that social media in general and things like Facebook are easy because they're free, and
right.
They're not. They're actually very difficult to do well. I just wanted to throw that in there. Would you mind?
There's your first webinar for the fall, Jamie.
Would you mind going back to your content slide? Your last slide, so we can see your email.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah. But it's just coming up with interesting little things like, you know, did you know that our cataloger, you know, knits or something like that? Just like people love like the everyday thing, the personal thing. Like we started out even just saying, you know, did you know our cataloging assistant and her son are doing the science fair thing? And everybody liked it. It got like 90 likes.
Right. And I think that's where the personal, the fun stuff can really kind of come in. Another question, under interests, Google Analytics is showing user interests. Other pages show gender, etc. Is this pulled from a user's Gmail Google profile or cookies on user computers?
That I need to check. That's sort of a follow-up on what Carolyn asked. I can
Okay.
follow up on that.
Okay.
And
So I'm going
who
to,
asked.
Anne, if you wouldn't mind following up with Nina on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I have another question, and then I have one before we wrap up. Can any of the social media analytics help with web analytics?
I have not used those, so I do not know. I would imagine, because if you are any tracking and analytics you do in one platform, if you know, again, if your purpose in using social media is to drive people to your website and drive people to your online presence, you know, it's going to have kind of a cumulative effect. I have not used any of the social media analytics packages, though, so I can't really comment on that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Final question. So my colleague was recently at the Computers and Libraries Conference, and I believe I met you at that conference a few years ago, Nina, actually.
Yeah.
And she was telling me about how she was in a session, and I don't know who was speaking, but she was tweeting about how nobody uses library websites anymore. Like we shouldn't be focusing on those, and nobody uses them. So the analytics don't matter. So I'm just wondering what your quick thoughts are, what your thoughts are on that.
I think there's always kind of a backlash to, you know, X is dead, we shouldn't do this anymore. But so how do I get students, you know, in the case of an academic library, I spend $80,000 a year at my little community college library on electronic databases. How do I get them there?
Right.
So I kind of see what she's saying, but by the same token, how do we, that sort of gets back to the point I was making about not forcing people to go where they don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think anything we do having to do with library websites, we need to maintain a strong user focus. You know, don't develop. When I worked at Georgetown, we would spend, so maybe this is kind of what she's getting at. When I worked at Georgetown in the reference department, we would spend hours just agonizingly, painstakingly developing these research guides. We had like 40 of them.
And was anyone using them?
That was before we did any analytics on those.
Okay.
I do not do guides now. When I got to Red Rocks, I canceled our LibGuide subscription because I think that is the kind of content that users do not want. That is the kind of content that librarians want users to want.
Right.
But I don't think they do. I kind of take her point that we often think we know what we want them to want. But I think as long as, I mean, we have to have websites. We have to have an online presence. But I think maybe her point was to be careful about, you know, that we're not like developing what we think they want and making sure that it's practical and user-focused.
Well, and I agree, because it's not like Facebook is the correct platform to put the things you need. I mean, when we were developing our system website, in that development, I was using Facebook for that purpose, and it was not meant to do that. So I can't imagine not having a site or not having a functional site, I guess. But I thought you brought up some great points. So we are just about out of time. I want to thank Nina for an excellent presentation and all of the information. As I mentioned at the beginning, the slides and the recording will be up later today. We appreciate the feedback on the survey that you will get. And that is all I have. Again, thank you, Nina. Thank you for all of you for your questions and your comments. That's what makes webinars a lot more lively, is when we get participation from all of you. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great rest of your day and week. And so long.